Hello, everybody. I'm happy to be here today, happy to help you out. Interestingly, I usually do interviews for oral history. I started a local history group in Breezy Point, New York, and I was just talking to, I'm the president right now, I'm just talking to somebody this morning that lining up interviews for oral history. So now I'm on the other side of the screen, though I'm quite a bit younger, I hope, than some of the people that we interview who are really part of history. But I'm here for any questions you have, and I'll be glad to fill you in. While I'm speaking, if there's something I can make clearer for you, tell me. Bear in mind, I'm a little bit hard of hearing, so I may not always pick up what's being said. I'll just give you a brief overview of who I am to give you some sense where you can begin, so you can frame your questions. And I always ask my students that teach law school, I always want to, first class, I want to know who they are, where they're from. I want to know something about them so I can frame my questions to them or whatever it is I'm talking about. As you know, I went to St. Joseph's College. I arrived here in 1973, graduated in 1976. The 70s were somewhat unusual. Well, they were dramatic years, the 70s. And I certainly was a part of the 70s, but St. Joseph's was very much an oasis from some of the chaos in society. After St. Joseph's, well, before St. Joseph's, I had a relatively undistinguished academic career. As you may or may not know, it takes boys a little longer to wake up than girls. St. Joseph's, I woke up and started moving a little faster. I got my master's from Brooklyn College in history after I graduated from here. Then I went to St. John's Law School. While I was in law school, I was a little bored with law. I did my doctorate at night in history. The word to students, don't put things off. I never finished my dissertation, couldn't find the time. As a result, no PhD. But I went on for law anyway. I got a law degree. And several years later, I did find the time for another law degree. It's called an LLM in environmental law. So that's kind of my academic background. My love, even though I'm a lawyer, my love has always been history. To this day, I thrill at picking up a half a dozen history books at Barnes & Noble. And I realize there's an addiction here because every time I walk in a Barnes & Noble, I'm walking out with a bag and spending money. I know that. And I'm driving my wife crazy because the books are piling up, but I love history. So all the more reason I'm very happy to add whatever footnotes to St. Joe's history that I can for your benefit. As far as my work experience, I've spent most of my career in various positions doing research and writing in what's called New York State Supreme Court Appellate Division. It's the court that does appeals in New York. I retired a couple of years ago. I've taught law school for years as an adjunct, and I write law books, and I read history books. So that's kind of the broad background of who I am, where I'm from. I'm from a Brooklyn family. We've been in Brooklyn since the mid-19th century. So even though I don't live in Brooklyn right now, it's very much a part of who I am, being in Brooklyn. That whole neighborhood experience was a very formative experience for me. I spent 25 years in Ridgewood, New Jersey. Now I'm in Breezy Point, technically Queens, even though we all think we're from Brooklyn. But in some respects, my life has been like that. Within boundaries, St. Joe's is small. It was smaller when I was here, and I can fill you in a little bit on that. I had friends go to large universities around the country. That wasn't really what was going to work for me. And I've pretty much stayed local, and I love it. Tell me who you are in any order. And by the way, I wish we could sit down in a room and all get comfortable with one another. I enjoy the face-to-face back and forth. I hate Zoom, but we're in a remote world now, so that's where we are. So, Albina, we'll start with you. If you can hear me, you're smiling. I assume you can all hear me. Where do you live? Where are you from? What's your interest in St. Joe's history, for instance?
Okay, so my full name is Albina Hawk. I am a sophomore, double majoring in mathematics and computer science. And Actually, I'm not from the USA. I just came in the I've arrived in USA in this July. I
Oh,
am from
okay.
Bangladesh, that is other end of this world.
Yeah.
Bangladesh, beside India. So I'm
Wow.
an international person and still adapting to the new culture right now.
Sure. And India, I know, is not one culture. It's multiple cultures. It's very complex.
Yeah, like I'm from Bangladesh. That Bangladesh is another country like beside India, like in the
Oh,
border of
I'm sorry. I heard India. That's what I focused on. Yes, I know where that is. Yes.
Yeah.
Eunice, how about you? You're the next on my screen.
So my full name is Eunice Bonita Ramos. I am a sophomore majoring in marketing with a minor in business administration. And I'm actually from Huntington, which is on Long Island.
Okay, we're on Long Island?
Huntington?
Oh, sure. Huntington, sure.
Yeah,
Out
it's
of the
like,
North Shore.
it's
Halfway
like
out of the
an
North Shore.
hour and 40 minutes away.
Oh, I know.
But,
Long Island's
yeah.
bigger than people realize, particularly when
Yeah.
you talk about traffic. The LIE is not the quickest way to get around.
No, it's not.
Is it Pooja? Do I say that right?
Yeah, it's Pooja.
Oh, Pooja, okay. So tell me all about yourself in 10 words or less.
I am Pooja Karka, and currently I'm a junior international student from Nepal. And
Oh,
I'm
Nepal, really?
yeah.
Wow, that's further away than Long Island.
Yeah.
Still sort of South Asia.
Yeah. And I'm double majoring in economics and mathematics.
Wow. There's a lot of math going on here, business math, that sort of thing, computers. Bouquet, am I saying that right? And correct me if I'm not.
So my name is actually Bouquet Usta, and I'm a sophomore majoring in medical technology. And I was born and raised in Brooklyn.
Where?
Brooklyn.
Oh, Brooklyn. Oh, a local boy. Okay. And Ahmad, if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yeah. There's different ways to pronounce it. My name is.
We lost you.
There we go.
You're back.
Okay.
Okay.
My name is Ahmed Tamara, and I am from Brooklyn. I'm a sophomore, and my major is biology. I'm my both parents are Egyptian, so I have that background.
You all have very impressive backgrounds and careers, and boy, to travel alone to get here. You're going to ask me why I went to St. Joe's at some point. I'll ask you to start off. Why did you go to St. Joe's? Why don't we start with? Oh, okay, we'll start on my left. Albina, how about you?
Why I chose St. Joseph's?
Yeah, well, why did you choose St. Joseph's?
Well, first of all, it was a small college. I looked it up and it gave so much generous scholarship, and it was so diverse. From Nepal, people from Egypt, people from Bangladesh, all over the world, people were here. And also the small college, the classroom may consist 15 of students. That actually lured me into St. Joseph's. Like I can have a really close relationship with the professors and my peers.
I hear you on that, yes. Eunice, how about you?
So I knew I wanted to go to school in the city because I like the whole environment. And when I came for the campus tour, like everyone seemed so nice, and they made me feel like I wasn't going to be just a number. I was going to have a close relationship with my professors. So I really liked that. And also it came down with like finance. They gave me a really good scholarship. So that's what ultimately.
And I'm pointing, but you can't see where I'm pointing. How about you?
It was because like I was planning to pursue my bachelor's degree in US, but I was not sure in which state. I was planning on going to Ohio, but my parents were encouraging me to go to New York, and this was giving me a good scholarship, and I saw that teacher to student ratio was good here, and that's why I chose St. Joseph's.
Okay, Bouquet, how about you?
So actually, my sister goes to this school, and I heard some stuff from it about her, but also for the same reasons, like the scholarship and the small class sizes, because lecture halls honestly don't look very fun.
And Ahmad?
So I have this friend who is now a dentist, graduated from St. Joseph's College, who works in my dad's dentist office. And she basically recommended it as one of the top options for colleges. And that's what basically pushed me into going.
Okay, I'm glad you all told me that, because it actually resonates with a lot of my reasons for being at St. Joe's. And what I took away from St. Joe's, when I look back, the value that it had for me. You're all in different ways kind of touching on those themes. So now that we know a little bit about one another, why don't you shoot your questions at me? Where do you want to begin?
Okay, first of all, we want to thank you for taking your time out and agreed to do this for us. It will be a really great asset for our archives. And I hope you didn't have much trouble getting to college today. The weather is not so good, let's say.
The rain appeared in the last 10 minutes. And I said, I couldn't leave home 10 minutes earlier. No, I had no trouble getting to college today, no. From Breezy Point, it's down Flatbush Avenue and down Rogers Avenue. It's a well-trod track. I've been doing it for decades, and the weather was just fine.
And how is your, adjusting to the post-COVID, our new normal,
I'm sorry?
How are you adjusting to the new normal of the world, post-COVID situation?
Oh, that new normal. Give me just a second and I'll be glad to respond to you. I'm adjusting because I have to adjust. Well, I should mention I had COVID. So there was a recovery period. So for me, pre-COVID was an entirely different world in that sense. But one of my classes I had to teach after that by WebEx, which is similar to Zoom. It was an adjustment. Many of my professional meetings are by Zoom now. That's an adjustment. My kids, I have 2 children in their 20s. My son, I should mention, my mother went here, my aunt went here, my sister and my son Kevin graduated a couple of years ago. So we're a St. Joseph's family. They are light years ahead of me when it comes to technology. So I'm adjusting slowly to that aspect of the world. Proceed with more questions.
Yes, okay, first we dive into the interview. How do you want us to address you, Mr. Kevin or Mr. Reilly? How do you want us to address you?
Kevin.
Okay.
I'm comfortable with Kevin. If you're comfortable on a first name basis, I am.
Okay, great
Sure.
to hear. Thank you very much. Then, okay, we should just dive into the interview. First, Bukit will read out the excerpt that it is recording for a purpose.
Yes.
So, to you.
I signed a waiver, I know that.
Okay, so I'll just read it. This recording was made as a part of the oral history project by St. Joseph's College, Brooklyn campus honors program students in fall 2021 semester. It was recorded on Friday, November 12th, 2021 at 12:30 p.m. via Zoom. The interviewers are Albina Haq, Pooja Katka, Eunice Bonita Ramos, Ahmad A. Tamara, and Bukit Usta. The narrator is Mr. Kevin Reilly, St. Joseph's College class of 1976.
Yes, I waived all rights. Any revenue you get out of this is yours. I got that. Okay. Yeah, we're being recorded, of course. So that's everything we say. There's nothing I can imagine will be indiscreet, but anything we say will be for posterity. Okay, have we worked through the formalities now? Who wants to ask me about my experience in St. Joe's, that period of history, what St. Joe's was like back then? I think that sort of covers what the oral history project's about. But target, I'll respond to you. I don't want to take charge of the interview. I'll respond to you. So direct your inquiries of me. Ask me whatever you want.
So my first question for you is, you enrolled in St. Joseph's College in the fall of 1973, and you graduated with a degree in history and science in 1976. Your mother and your aunt both were alumni of St. Joseph's College. So were they your influence in choosing St. Joseph's as your college, or?
Why did I choose St. Joseph's?
Yeah.
It was a little chosen for me. I might have alluded to, I was not a distinguished high school student. I wasn't very focused. And there were financial considerations. I was the oldest in the family. There were 3 more coming up behind me. And there wasn't much in the way of money. So I was not going away to college. And given that I think my parents figured out I probably needed an atmosphere that was conducive to me settling down and focusing. And my mother always had a very close relationship with St. Joseph's. She's not one of those people who graduated and they never heard from her again. She maintained her relationship with the school. So I ended up at St. Joseph's. And in retrospect, even at the time, I kind of knew it. It was, as I said, it was partly finances. We could afford St. Joseph's. St. Joe's at the time was hanging on by a shoestring. It was barely hanging on, and it had gone co-ed just a couple of years before that. So the tuition then as now was soft. They gave me a partial scholarship. It made it possible for me, bearing in mind I had 3 coming up behind me who had to go somewhere to college. So combination of it, my mother's connection with the school, finances, and for me at that time, it seemed to be a better fit. I had friends go to Fordham, larger schools, places like that. I would have been a little bit lost. They had constant keg parties. I went to the keg parties, but my days were at St. Joe's. It was smaller, it was intimate, and some of the very things that you talked about. I discovered that it was so easy to fit in. It was a small school. It's larger now, believe me. You knew everybody very quickly, but more importantly, the teachers knew me and the other students. Now I had my friends in Brooklyn, so I'd leave school. I had plenty of friends and go back to Bay Ridge where I lived. But I found a very tight social group here. We fit in very easily together. And I think the faculty was a part of that. And one of you alluded before, 15 people in a class, we'd have sometimes 10. We had small classes. The teachers got to know you very quickly and very well, particularly since I don't think there were more than a couple hundred students in the school at the time. And I found that to be very nurturing. And it kind of it helped me focus at a point in my life when I should have been focusing better. And as I said, I went to Fordham. You're there among thousands of people. At St. Joe's, it was much smaller, and it helped me be much more attentive to my studies. So that goes beyond your question, why did I come here? That partially answers, why did I stay here? And a former president of the college said to me once when I was talking to him, I was president of the Alumni Association back then. He said, students don't necessarily come to St. Joe's for the faculty. They stay because of the faculty. My brother, after me, went to Yale, and you had big name professors, huge names. And in his first year, he'd walk into a class with 200 or 300 students. The teacher didn't have a clue who the students were. They just got up there and did their thing. And frankly, a surprising amount of the time, they weren't even there. Teacher assistants were there. So it's a whole different dynamic. Big name professors, very big names. It was almost immaterial because there was no connection. At St. Joe's, there was an immediate connection with the teachers. So I found that to be, for me, extraordinarily valuable. Okay, I've overshot that question. You want to refine that further or more questions?
I have another question.
Sure.
So, as we already established, in 1969, SJC went co-ed, which made you one of the first batches of male students. So could you please elaborate on your experience at SJC while it was a predominantly female institution?
It was different. Yes, we were one of the first co-ed classes. There were very few men. So you got to know everybody very quickly. I could compare it to what my friends and other people had, where you walked into a student body with hundreds of people, mixed, very mixed. With St. Joe's, it was St. Joseph's College for women, not long before that. And I think it was designed originally to provide a nurturing academic experience for women during eras when women didn't really go to college. They came to St. Joe's and they knew, well, first of all, teaching was a specialty back then. And the social criticism can be made that, well, women back in the 30s, the 40s, the 50s was steered towards very few careers: teaching, nursing, homemaker, and maybe you can think up one or two more. That was kind of it for women. And St. Joe's, I think, was during those years attempted to broaden the horizons for women by, as I said, giving them a nurturing place, a conducive place to earn their degree. And many happened to go on for teaching. It had a great reputation then as now for teaching. But economically, by the late 60s, and the 60s were an era when a lot of small private colleges were closing up, which continued into the 70s. And a lot of the families that had been in Brooklyn, that in earlier eras, their daughters would have gone to St. Joseph's. Well, after the war, suburbia drew those people out to the suburbs. There was a whole dynamic change in society where people that had been in the same neighborhoods for 3 generations, the men came home from the war, people got married, and next thing they wanted was Levittown. I don't mean the specific Levittown, but the generic new suburb with the front lawns and the barbecue in the backyard and the great schools and the sports fields. I mean, these dreams drew people out of Brooklyn. So a lot of the women that would have gone to St. Joe's originally, they weren't there anymore. They had to expand the student body. So they brought in men. And I wasn't the first class, I wasn't the second, but I was a couple more after that. So back to your question, what effect did it have on me? I fit in. It was different from my friends, as I said, who would be among hundreds of people. But it was very pleasant. I found it very pleasant. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I did. Thank you. I
Sure.
also have another question.
Oh, if you want to pursue that further, that's fine, but be specific on how.
I think it was answered really good. You
Sure.
gave a good answer. All right. So going along with the same topic, so during your time here at St. Joe's, you were a member of the Senate and the chairperson of the Grievance Committee.
I forgot that, by the way. Until it was brought up, I forgot all about that.
Well, good. Thanks that I remembered you. So yeah, could you please share with us how the campus life was like at the time you attended St. Joe's?
Well, frankly, the Senate didn't do a lot. The school population wasn't large to begin with. And it was a transitional culture for the faculty and the administration. So I think the faculty and administration was still trying to figure things out. And to return to a question a couple of minutes ago about how the men fit in, I can tell you the administration didn't know what to do with us. It was so different for them. We got away with quite a lot, actually, because it was just they didn't know what to do with us. And so the fact that the Senate, the student Senate, didn't have much of a role. I think they met a couple of times a year, but I can't even remember what we met over. There's more just there was a student Senate. It was a time of transition for everybody. It was a very calm place. Now, if you went to Columbia in those days, where students were basically locking up the administrators or other schools around the country, that simply didn't go on here. It was a very quiet oasis. I think I used that term earlier. Socially, it was a very quiet oasis. There was no tension. The students coming in, the men might have been a little bit impatient with some of the traditionalism and some of the, the slow pace of things. But frankly, I never picked up on tension at all. So you had people of a much more traditional nature, many of the women, many of whose mothers went here, could be comfortable with the men coming in. And the men coming in were basically from a traditional Catholic background. So they weren't bomb throwing revolutionaries. It was a good fit. Did I answer that question?
Yeah. Do you also think, if you still remember, do you remember any other like clubs that were available at St. Joseph's during your time?
Was I a member of other clubs? Is that your question, or?
Like, no, like, do you remember like other clubs that were available at that time?
I don't recall. I frankly don't recall. And in the yearbook, I should have dug out my yearbook. I'm not sure where it is. I do have it somewhere. Socially, basically, and this is a sideways answer to your question. Now, in many institutions, and St. Joe's today, I hope, you have clubs and organizations that each has a focal interest, and students join because they share that interest. We were too small a student body to diversify that much. Basically, social life consisted of what we call the rec room. I'm not sure what they call it now, but the rec room was not what it looks like now. It was basically couches and chairs. It was a very comfortable place to hang out. And so a lot of the students would hang out there. Then the cafeteria was the other place to hang out, and you had other students would hang out in the cafeteria. And rumor had it that some students hung out in the library too, which we would have to go to occasionally. That was basically, I mean, it was a very small campus. So socially, that's kind of where people gravitated to. There were a couple of local places, but in the 70s, local places outside the campus, there wasn't much there. To the north of the school along Myrtle Avenue wasn't especially safe. And I would walk up and down to the art train at DeKalb fairly often, up and down DeKalb Avenue. Nothing really fazed me at all. But you just got a sense that the neighborhood wasn't so safe at the time. I was 6'3" and nobody bothered me. But more to the point, there was nowhere to go. There were 1 or 2 bars, and at 18 back then, you could go to a bar. There was one diner around the corner, which recently closed. It had a different name, but the diner's been there ever since. There was nowhere else to go in the neighborhood. You now have a thriving neighborhood. I mean, Fort Greene and Clinton Hill are hot, prestige areas now. My daughter lived around the corner here for about a couple of years ago, during the pandemic. The good news was she was in Clinton Hill, where she wanted to be because it was so cool. The bad news was a pandemic. She's paying rent and couldn't go out. So she got out of that. But the campus life in those days partly reflected the neighborhood life, which was very restricted outside. I think your campus life today, you can really take advantage of the neighborhood. I think it's become very much of a literary place, Fort Greene and Clinton Hill. I know St. Joe's has the Literary Institute here. Back then, we actually had a very good theater group back then, the Chapel Players. And you still have that, I'm glad to say. My son was on it. He loved it. My son was kind of a quiet kid. He joined Chapel Players, and he just sort of found himself. And to this day, I wasn't in Chapel Players, but to this day, I had friends who were. And I still see them, and they still kind of carry that with them. So that's kind of describing the campus social life back then. And back to my original point, there may have been clubs. How many decades later, don't remember what they are. Next. Okay, you've been quiet. Therein line, I'm a professor, so I call on students.
Okay, well, you've mentioned how your mom and your aunt also went to St. Joseph's before you, and you made
But they
a
didn't go after me.
St. Joseph's family. Yeah, you made a St. Joseph's family, and I was just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on how different the school was for them versus how it was for you. Like, I know you described your campus life a lot, but is there like any information that you have on how it was for them?
Not having been there myself, nevertheless, derivative history, yes. In fact, I've got several photo albums of my mother's from college. And it's the social histories, what you pick up in photos is very interesting. Now, when I arrived here, to start with that, it was the 70s. We came in dungarees, Western shirts. It was sort of the style at the time, maybe fry boots, maybe sneakers. It was looking at the dress that people wore. It was very casual, very of the times. There was no distinction between outside the school and inside the school in terms of what people wore. I can see the photos from my mother's period here. She graduated in 42. It was all women. Very well dressed in dresses. I don't think I've ever seen a photograph of a student back then wearing slacks, let alone dungarees. And I'm pretty sure none did. So the dress, I think, is a hint as to the different social circumstances. At the time, it was almost, call it a finishing school for women, though it was not quite that. It was really an academic institution. I probably shouldn't have put it that way. But it was one to raise women in a certain environment, academic, intellectual, proper. My era was the 70s, and getting back to what I was saying a few minutes ago, much, much more casual. You could walk off campus and there'd be no difference with the rest of your life. So that's clothing as a hint. Now, when my mother was here, from what she has said over the years, I know she's very active socially, she maintained a very close social connection with the friends she made at St. Joseph's. She died at the age of 98 2 years ago. Some almost until her dying day. There were only a couple left at that point. She might have been the last, actually. But through the decades, they stayed very close. So those friendships at St. Joseph's, it was already set apart from society in the sense that you had an intellectual institution for women. So already by going there, the women were somewhat set apart from society. Their social bonds, I think, sort of reflected that. And those social bonds continued for, as I said, decades after that. Many went into teaching. Others got married out of college. A couple went on for other professional careers. And that, too, was very unusual when compared to society of the day. By the time my era came along, the idea of a woman going to law school or medical school or something besides getting married right out of college, you know, it didn't cross people's mind that women would go on professionally and you weren't in college with marriage being the end goal of college. So I think the social circumstances and lifestyles were very different in that sense too. I'm not sure how else I can answer you.
Honestly, that's enough. Like, that's a good answer.
Okay, I'm thinking the pedagogy, talking about this being an intellectual institution for women, which it was. The courses were probably very different. And you could probably get some of this by going back through some old records of the college. But I think back then you probably had more traditional type courses, heavy emphasis on English, history, things of that nature, humanities. But I would think it would be taught in a much more traditional style, even though I think even then St. Joseph's was very open-minded in terms of how they taught things and the type of information that came into a humanities class. Many other institutions at the time teaching the humanities, it was much more restrictive the way they taught it. By the time I came along, of course, any boundaries were down. And history and English in my era, probably different from today, was still very popular majors. Today, it's probably, as I judge from you, much more tech-oriented, much more business-oriented, much more, you got to earn a living, let's get a career-oriented. With us, I think it was probably much more of a rarefied intellectual approach. You can learn all you want about 19th century American literature, and it's a wonderful thing. It may not get you a job, but that wasn't the emphasis back then when I went here in the 70s. Did I answer that question more fully? Okay.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're being quiet. How about you?
Sorry, I was just gonna follow through and talk about, I was gonna ask, from the time that you were at St. Joseph's, your relationships with professors and peers, how were they really? And did you have any specific relationship with a peer or a professor that you'd like to discuss with us?
Yes, while I was here and continuing thereafter, we've formed some close bonds with professors. Now, I started out in biology. I didn't study biology. Friends of mine that were in bio had very close relationships with a couple of the teachers there. And a couple of my, people from my era in particular went very far politically, not politically, academically, because of those relationships. In English also, there were teachers who were very popular, a couple who were very popular. I had history. Sister Joseph Damien was one of she was the chairman of the department while I was there. But she's one I stayed in contact with for years. And in fact, many of her students stayed in contact with her. And to this day, when they make contributions, when they write the annual check, very often, you have an opportunity to say who it's in memory of. Very often, people will write that check in memory of Sister Joseph Damien, Sister Joseph Damien Hanlon. With the nuns, you have to, there's not many there right now, but there were multiple names you had to kind of keep track of. Of course, if you forgot who the word is easy. Everybody's, hello, sister, how you doing? The college from then to now, this, I'm going off from your point a little bit. It's different in the sense too. We had several religious teachers. Not in the traditional, I mean, they were religious, of course, highly educated. I mean, they all had PhDs, very well educated. I don't know if there are any religious teachers on campus right now actively teaching. And that may create a difference also. Though intellectually shouldn't make much of a difference at all. Did I answer that question?
Yeah, effectively. And I was just going to follow it through with just
Sure.
something personally. Was there ever a situation where there was a teacher that everyone, like, it was kind of an unwritten rule that everyone had to know this teacher? Or was it just everyone was an average teacher? There wasn't anything special or anything like that at your time at St. Joseph's?
Well, since this is being recorded and for marketing purposes, they were all above average. There was no average. Is your hidden question whether there were a couple of clunkers? Any institution, you can always cherry pick somebody. But I would have to say, I mean, all kidding aside, depending on how you judge average, I think they were almost all above average. If you define teaching skills as reaching the students, keeping the students interested, getting feedback, positive feedback from the students, getting a point across, and having a dialogue back and forth. In that sense, in my memory, almost all of them were very successful. And going back to the example I gave before about my brother Reilly, my sister went to, before my sister came here, she was at Fairfield for a while. There was no contact with the teachers. So was the teacher good, bad, indifferent? You couldn't really judge because there was no contact. I mean, they could get up there and read their notes to you. Maybe you could read their book. But teaching is an almost undefinable quantity and quality. when you bond between the student and the teacher, where there's a synergy, something happens intellectually, where the student is lifted out of where they were originally, and they kind of get brought up to a higher plane, partly because of the teacher and partly because something innate in themselves gets triggered by whatever it is about that teacher that works. And sometimes it may be intellectual skills, it may be social skills, it may be even just the ability to speak. You know, some teachers speaking, you know, diction may not be so great, maybe they're not so exciting, but there may be something about them that intellectually they can kind of bring you into their field. Other teachers are great salesmen. You know, they can get up there and they can sell coals to Newcastle just because they are so effective at communications. So these are all different aspects of teaching. So if you're asking me to rate the quality of teachers, I have to ask, where are you starting from? What are you looking for? Broadly, I'll go back to what I said. In my memory, almost all the ones I had were excellent, and friends of mine in different majors. And as I pointed out, we all saw one another all day, every day in the same place. So you certainly heard everything there was to hear about other classes and other majors. And I got to say, overwhelmingly, it was a positive feedback as far as the different teachers. Some rose very high, which I alluded to before. Some of them just really, they were very responsible for their students going much further. And the rest, excellent. But the personal quality too, I can't emphasize that enough. That personal connection mattered. Did I answer that question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, who hasn't?
As you mentioned earlier, that 1970s was a very turbulent time for the US. Financially, there was stagflation going on, and socio-politically minorities were fighting for their equalities, and also there were debates and protests around Vietnam War. So I want to know that how the college reacted to these incidents, like how students and staffs were involved or indirectly or directly, how they reacted to the whole surroundings at that time.
Sure, I'll start by telling you what we were not. Going back to what I said a few minutes ago, we were not Columbia. We were not campuses which the tension was just below the surface. We weren't campuses where the teachers, where the students rather, felt entitled to basically rebel. There were times with a lot of tension outside in society, in the streets, in the world. There was a time of tremendous change in all respects, partly generational. I mean, you always have generational change, so you always have that disconnect between parents and children. No matter how close the relationship is, it's always going to be a little bit of a disconnect, because students, of course, are very tied in with their outside world, whereas parents are tied in with a world that's receding somewhat. So you're always going to have that generational issue. And in some of these other schools, I think that was the factor which almost invited students to speak out about some of the larger issues going on in society. And you've touched on many of them, and there were many more. And it wasn't one issue or another. It was a tumultuous time. And if you want to get into more history about it, I could talk forever about that, but we only have so much time here. But after the Second World War, that you had the Depression and the war. That 15 to 20 years was a watershed era in American history. After the war, in the 50s, you had a period of deceptive calm, plenty of jobs, money was available, though certainly not to everybody. Many people from the middle class moved to the suburbs. They were chasing dreams that after the Depression and after the war, you can understand what they were after. Of course, not all levels of society have those opportunities. If you went to the South, there were serious problems there. Then you had the Black migration during the 50s up to the North, which dislocated many traditional blue-collar neighborhoods in the North and industry. So there was a lot of tumult going on. Then throw into that something you probably don't appreciate today, the existential perception of conflict between communism and capitalism, communism, collectivism, and democracy, capitalism. All this was churning increasingly as we got into the 60s. And there's a lot behind that, which I'm not going to get into right now. Students coming of age are subject to all of that in the 70s. And it's a very literate society. I think it was probably more literate than now. Social media governs so much of what people connect with today. Probably with social media, there's no vetting. I mean, it's very hard to judge what's valid, what's not valid. Well, when I grew up, it was a very literate society. People read books. And when I came into college every day, everybody's talking, and these were normal kids. I'm around on the streets afterwards. Everybody's talking about the books they were reading. And if you're reading books and newspapers were everywhere, you're picking up on information from every possible direction. And at that age, your upper teens, early adolescence, mid-adolescence, your brain is developing very rapidly. The frontal lobe is developing very rapidly. And so you're processing all this information. I may be going beyond your question, but this is all going on at the same time. So it was tumultuous. Now your question, what was it like at St. Joseph's? Very calm. We all talked and we all had lives outside of St. Joseph's. I went back to my crowd in Brooklyn, which were very divided along ideological lines. So in the evening, I get together with a bunch of friends and they were all arguing all over the place. St. Joe's, we talked about it, but I don't remember that kind of tension on campus. It was, I said before, very much of an oasis. But I should also point out, it's very diverse today. St. Joe's in those days grew from Brooklyn, a little bit from Queens. They didn't draw from South Asia or the rest of the world. It was essentially Catholic, people raised in a similar tradition, largely Irish and Italian. Those are different traditions, but still was a Catholic tradition. So what you had was actually a cultural template that itself didn't invite conflict. So to whatever extent we were learning from the outside world. Meanwhile, many of us went home to families that were sort of traditional, and that's a very broad category of traditional. Both my parents worked, both professionals. My mother had 2 master's degrees. Other people went home, the mother was a homemaker. Nevertheless, we shared an awful lot of cultural attributes. So in that sense, St. Joseph's was set apart from some of the more volatile academic institutions of the day. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it was a great overview of that time. That was a great answer. Thank you for that.
Sure. Next, who's been quiet?
I'll go. So both you and your mother were in the Alumni Association, and you both served as the president for quite a while, but did she ever give you any insight on how to run things? And did you ever go on trips like her with the school?
The trips. And in fact, I'm going to make a strong, until I read over the proposed questions, I never thought about that. And I've been thinking about it, because I'm still very active with the Alumni Association. Either they couldn't get rid of me or I couldn't get rid of them. I'm not sure what it was, but I've been active with the Alumni Association for a long time. I'm going to recommend they bring back the trips, but that's neither here nor there with respect to your question. During I think probably more in the 80s, and my mother, as I said, maintained a close relationship with her crowd from St. Joe's over the years. They got married. Most of them moved to the suburbs. We stayed in Brooklyn, but they still stayed in contact. In, I'd say, probably the late 70s, into the 80s, into the 90s, the Alumni Association and this crowd of graduates, my mother's generation, and some younger, some actually a couple from my own generation would join the trips, would go on alumni trips around the world, and they were great trips. I never went on one with them. I was busy paying bills, not spending money on trips in those days. By then I was raising a family and paying mortgages. No, I love travel. I absolutely love travel and I want to get back into it again now. But I think those alumni trips were a great way to re-cement the relationship of a lot of these people with the school. And not everybody in the trip went to St. Joe's. It was just a trip and other people would join, you know, friends of graduates, spouses of graduates, anybody who wanted to come. But I think it turned out to be a very collegial group each trip they went on. And very often they had the same travel agent, P.P. Pura, ran them all. I think he got a great client at St. Joe's. I did not go on those trips. I just know that my mother looked forward to one every year. And that was yet another device which bound together the graduates from that era. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, but could you also, if you have any knowledge, did she ever tell you how to run things as the president of the Alumni Association, or did you just go in with like no knowledge of it?
Of what? I'm sorry, I missed the first part of that.
The Alumni Association, you were the president.
Oh, how did I end up there? When I got out of law school, I think, I was asked, and I stayed in contact with St. Joe's. I would come back and see the professors and see friends that were still here. It was so small. I mean, friends, 2 classes behind me were my friends. You got to know everybody. So I maintained that contact. And at some point, I was asked to come on to the alumni board. And at that time, the 2 camp, they just started the Long Island campus. They had one at Brentwood before that, but the much larger one had started around then. So it was really one alumni board. And they asked me to join. And somebody, a friend from behind me at St. Joe's, who was a year behind me at St. John's Law School too, Sharon Scatora, also joined the board. I think they were looking to bring younger people in. And somehow they roped my mother in to be president. But she just willingly said, sure, whatever. So it was probably interesting. You had a mother and son who were the president and the vice president at the same time. On our part, it was just volunteerism. What can we do to be helpful? And after that, they kind of expected me to step up. I had a law career, and I couldn't do it at that time. Several years later, and now maybe I'm going back 10 years, maybe 12 years from now, I had friends on the board from my era who talked me into going back on the executive board. And I arrived and I enjoyed it. And there were several people from my era, several people from, call it a prior generation. The goal now, I think, is to pull in younger generations. I can talk to you about that later on too. And as I rejoined the board, I wasn't really looking for anything. They asked me a couple of times if I would step up to be president. I didn't have the time. And eventually I got cornered. Said, okay, I'll do it. What could go wrong? Well, they changed presidents at the time. And there was a little bit of tension there, not to go into details, but a little bit of tension with the changeover in the administration. And so I kind of navigated that successfully, I think. And rather than go off the board, I just stayed on the board. I enjoy it very much. I love my association at the school. And frankly, the executive board, we've become friends. Those that didn't start as friends, we've become friends over the years. Before the pandemic, we would get together for meetings 4 times a year and get together for other events. So I started almost right out of college. I went off for a while. I came back on and I've stayed on. Does that answer your question? Okay, does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Okay. If you have follow-up, just ask me.
Yeah, I want to follow up on that. That, in your opinion, how much importance does Alumni Association hold in shaping college's image and also in shaping students' experience in college?
I think a lot. Now, the correct answer for marketing, who's ever listening to this, is it's tremendous. All kidding aside, I think a lot. And I think we want to have more of a double feedback back and forth between the students and the alumni. We were struggling with that before the pandemic, and I think we have to return to that too. And the current president is very supportive of these things. He's really a wonderful person. As a general, now, of course, we have two executive boards now. There's the Long Island campus and the Brooklyn campus. So there is that difference. And each campus, I think, has its own culture. It's a little bit different. Students maybe come from different places, although I realize that there's cross-fertilization. You can take the same courses that can be done remotely. For the Brooklyn Executive Board, we're constantly trying to figure out what works best for the students, for the health of the school, the strength of the school, the strength of the academic institute as an academic institution, but also bearing in mind that you're going to be future alumni. So we want to attract you to the Alumni Association for that same purpose. I mean, we all need replacements. It's just nature. You move up in age. We would love to pull younger people into the Alumni Association. Now, you're all automatically in the Alumni Association. I don't know if you know that, but when you graduate, you're in. Don't have to sign a line anywhere. But as active alumni, that's what we would like to see. So we're actually trying to find ways. Now, it's one thing to say, join us, get active. It's another thing to say, well, now we have something for you to do. We're trying to figure out how to finesse that, how to attract you into the active alumni mode, but also give you something of value, something to work on, so that this continues down the road. Now, how does that affect the college? Well, different administrations are different. Sister Elizabeth, when she was president, I think listened very carefully. She was loved. I think she had a very close feel for the students and what was necessary. And Dawn, your current president, I think is of the same temperament. So it's actually a three-part answer. We have the Alumni Association, basically the active members, the executive board. You have the administration, and you have the student body. So you have this triangle. It's not really an equilateral triangle. It's kind of, different sides have different lengths at different times for different purposes. But I think that's what we would like to hear from students like you, how we can serve you better. Now, you're all going to off into your careers, and we can sit down and give advice. I don't know how relevant some of that advice is, because you're in a tech world, and it's changing. As my son would tell me, he's a techie, it's changing every year. So there's maybe not much in terms of technical advice we can give you. Life advice, sure. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and I must say that now and then we reach out to alumni for advice. Like still now, we reach out to alumni for advice, for internships, everything. That's really helpful.
The Alumni Association has tried to set up a mentorship program where, now, of course, the problem is you have to get mentors. The mentors are typically very busy people. They're professionals. So there's always that problem. And there's always a problem. You pull somebody in, give them something to do. So we need the students on the other side who are interested enough to reach out to the mentors, and then the mentors are going to respond back to the students. I know we've tried to do that. I'd like to see that increase. That initiative should come from the students, though. The students should say, we want to sit down and talk to people, and we'll find the people for you to sit down with. But if we pull 20, 30 people in, and they're sitting around a room waiting for people to ask some questions, we're not going to get those people back again as mentors. So give the mentors work, give them work to do, and I think we can get them.
Yeah, sure. And another thing, while we were researching, it was very impressive to find that all of your family members who have attended SJC had a tremendous record of leadership. Like, if I may read it out, that your mother was the secretary of Undergraduate Association Council, your aunt served as the president of Senior Class and Mercier Circle, and also as the chairman of Junior Senior Luncheon. your sister was the vice president of student government. In addition to that, you were the chairman of the grievance committee. And we'd like to know if taking the lead, is it in the DNA or is it encouraged in the family?
I didn't know any of that. And my sister was very quiet. I didn't realize she was involved. But of course, she arrived while I was still here, but her tenure in the school continued after I left. As far as my mother and my aunt, I wasn't around back then. I know my mother was salutarian or something like that at graduation. There's somewhere in her scrapbooks, I have all this. But to your basic point, taking leadership positions, I was never raised being told, step up and be a leader. Never thought about that. I think it's more a sense of altruism. You see a need and you step up and contribute. I think it is more of that. And I guess that's a form of leadership. It's not something I've sought. It is something that has sort of happened to me over time. I've been the president of a lot of professional organizations. And each time I wasn't seeking it out. People came to me and I said, okay, I can volunteer, I can do that. So I think for my family, that's where it's coming from. Just step up and help out. And if you don't watch yourself, if you step up and help out, before you know it, someone's going to make you president. That could be a mixed blessing sometimes. I'm kidding with that. Next question.
So the next question is, so you did your undergraduate program from SJC in history, and then you went for your master's program in history too. So did you go into your master's program right after graduating from SJC, or did you take some time off?
I started as a bio major. I ended up in history just because I loved history. I always loved history. I had started on a bio track here with a teacher who might not have been one of the favorites among students. If I had started with one that was a favorite, maybe my life would have gone off a different path. You never know how these contingencies kind of direct your life. I had thought about being pre-med. So I'm working my way to your answer. I had thought about being pre-med. I tell my students that I took 10 credits for organic chemistry in my third year. I took 55 credits in my third year. It was in a rush all of a sudden. That's when I woke up, everything all at once. Organic chemistry was wonderfully therapeutic. The delusion of going to medical school went away, never came back. Said, I can't do organic chemistry. And I ended up in history. And I figured, well, I'll teach history. I liked a lot of the life sciences like anthropology, archaeology, things like that, which is really a mix of science and history. But I wasn't moving too rapidly in any direction. I went for my master's in history at Brooklyn College just because I loved it. I got that done. But I wasn't moving fast forward. I didn't take time off in that sense. In fact, while I was going for my master's, I was working in construction for a little while. And I worked as a janitor for a little while and going on university down the road here, down to Cal. While I was involved in my master's degree, I spent the summer hitchhiking around the UK and Europe on $2 a day. So you can call that taking off. It was an adventure. The end result of the adventure was I came down with hepatitis. I spent 4 months, 4 weeks in the hospital in isolation. They had no medicine for it back then. Strangely enough, this is an answer to your question, because during that period of time, it was brought home to me. And I started off being very sick, got better bit by bit. It was being brought home to me by my parents. I was not moving in any direction fast. Why don't I consider law school? It took 4 weeks for me to promise I would apply to law school. And I did, Harvard and Yale. I kept my promise. The rejection letters I got were wonderful. the misspellings and grammatical errors all the way through, from Harvard in particular, was wonderful. Kept my promise. Well, that wasn't good enough. Anyway, I got persuaded to apply to law school. I ended up at St. John's. And St. Joe's actually wrote me some very good letters of recommendation. So I think St. Joe's was instrumental in me going to St. John's Law School. I had no goal in life of being a lawyer. I might have mentioned before, I was a little bit unfocused earlier in life. I had intellectual interests all over the place. None went in a direction that led to compensation in life, financial compensation. Law worked out very well. So I didn't take time off except for that ill-advised trip hitchhiking around Europe. I kept working at odd jobs and I kept moving academically, but it was really law school that made me focus. Now, I think I mentioned before, I was going to the boarding law school. So I finished my doctoral courses at night. I was in law school in the daytime. Went to C University at nighttime, the Graduate Center on 42nd Street back then. It's on 34th Street now. And it reacquainted me. I loved history. I mean, I really found myself in those doctoral courses in history. Of course, even in those days, a career in history was fraught with poverty. So I continued with law. So it wasn't a direct road from St. Joseph's to my legal career, but certainly the college had an influence in it. And by moving left and right again, I ended up in a very good career. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And to add to that, like when you were pursuing history as your major, what vision did you hold as a history undergraduate student? And what were your plans and what path did you expect to find yourself in after completing the program?
I'm sorry, that came across a little fuzzy. I might ask you to repeat that.
Yeah, sure. So when you were pursuing history as your major, what vision did you hold as a history undergraduate student? And what plans and what path did you expect to find yourself in after completing the program?
In the graduate program?
Yeah.
I found myself with financial needs that would never be met in history. So intellectually, I loved it. I had wonderful teachers. Now, I talked before about big names doesn't necessarily equate with teaching skills. I got to tell you, when I went in the City University Graduate Center, the history program at the time, and I chose that because I could afford it. Again, I'm the oldest in the family. There was no money really. City University, I could afford, while I'm also paying for law school. The teachers I had were phenomenal. I studied under Arthur Schlesinger Jr., which a name means nothing to you. He was in the Kennedy administration. He's one of the top American history professors, long gone now, but in his day. I took a course with an English professor who was very well known at the time on Mark Twain. And I took it figuring out it's easy course, a gut course. I discovered Mark Twain was one of the most phenomenal writers in American literature, which you would never think of. I was very fortunate in the professors I had in my graduate program. They were wonderful. And the courses were great. I loved history going in. I loved it more coming out. But I pursued law, which has been wonderful for me. It's been I'm forever thankful that I stumbled into law because it's provided me with a great career. And there I'm in a great court with great judges, great cases. So I consider myself extremely lucky, very fortunate. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. Ahmed, you moved. You started down here on the left, you're over there on the right now. Do you have any questions?
Me personally, I wanted to ask you, what's your opinion on students knowing what they want to do with their, I guess you could say, life? Because a lot of the time, as of now, people are told that they should know this and that before they even enter college. But I'm asking you, what is your personal opinion on people who go in undecided, or would you rather prefer that somebody knows exactly what they're going to do before they even get into college?
So you want the secret to life in 10 words or less?
Basically.
I can certainly give you a mixed perspective. And I start with this observation: everybody's different. My son is 28 now, graduated from St. Joe's. I wish he'd get a move on in terms of career. I'm speaking as a father. And as I think I've said, when I was younger, I was unfocused. I didn't really know where I was going with my career. I wasn't very career oriented. I was very involved in the issues of the day. I was constantly reading, constantly talking to people. I joined some political organizations. I was very involved with what was going on in the world. I just wasn't very involved with what was going on in my personal financial world. Everybody's different. I had a younger brother who, I think from the day he started grammar school, knew he wanted to be a success. And he was driven towards that. He went to Yale on scholarship, went to law school after that. Same family, different personalities. It's certainly helpful in a practical sense if you've got a good idea where you want to go, and if you get on that track early enough that you get there. But I have to say, not only was I not that person, and I turned out okay, but at this age, you're being exposed to so much. And I think a benefit of a college education and even graduate school and reading. But my advice is read, 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 and keep reading. Learn about the world. You're at a point in life, some people expect you to know all the steps ahead of you and what you're going to do. But you're at a point in life, you're still absorbing all this information about the world. You're still generating ideas within yourself. You're still responding to other people's ideas. And I think the richer intellectual environment very often is to keep absorbing these ideas. And you'll find your way eventually. I'm not of the school of thought that you have to start early knowing exactly what you want and getting there. Having said that, you've got people who've got, and I've got a very eclectic frame of mind. You've got people who have very structured, focused mindsets, and they are good at figuring out what they like, what they want to do. Those people tend to be more mathematical, as some of the people here are today. Mathematical people sometimes tend to be more structured and to get on with some kind of a career earlier. I think people with more discrete mindsets, not discrete, more eclectic mindsets, it takes them longer because they're still taking in so much and still churning over ideas. And I think that can be a very positive thing. After all, your life doesn't start or end at the age of 18, 20, 22. You've got a long life ahead of you. And what you're doing now, whether it's fast or slow, narrow or broad, you're basically laying down the tracks for the rest of your life. So I don't think it's critically important to have that goal in mind right now. What are you going to do with yourself? Particularly if the more intellectually curious people, they see much more and they want much more. They can't get it all. They're going to have to eventually focus. But I think it's much more important for them to keep exploring. Bearing in mind that somewhere down the road, that does have to be your career. Does that answer your question? I'm not giving you an answer. I'm giving you different perspectives. And it very much, now, what factors into this too, into your question maybe, is family background. There are families, immigrant families maybe, where the financial need for security is acute, or the practical, the sheer practical mindset that it took for those families to actually get here and get established is a very practical mindset. You give up a lot to achieve security. From that perspective, it may be much more important that the children who are being given this opportunity for education sort of get down to it and developing a career that's going to be financially successful. That comes from family, and that's not wrong. That's natural. It's understandable. But not every student, young student, fits in that framework. That comes down to navigating family expectations while you're also navigating your own intellectual broadened horizons and navigating what's available in society and the economy. Does that give you more perspective?
Yeah, it's a lot of things to consider when trying to decide
Sure.
in that category. I just
Something
also
to bear in
want to
mind too, you can always change your mind. The point in life, it's hard to change your mind. But if you start on one track, if you feel an urgency to get on a track and you start on that track, don't be afraid to change your mind down the road. Many people do that.
Yeah, I've seen a story once where someone became an astronaut, a doctor, and I think it was another field, but he did all three because he couldn't decide. But he still completed everything and had a fun life.
Yes, and you can always, I ended up in law. My love is history. I've done well in law. You can always end up in a career where it's necessary for financial security, and it's rewarding. It's intellectually rewarding, it's professional rewarding. But you can also have a second career. I've always maintained second careers. So if there's something that interests you intellectually, you can try to keep that going on the side. And maybe down the road somewhere that will be fruitful to you. Okay, next question.
So I guess our last question is about your speech at the new student parent orientation earlier this year. So do you think that parents need to consider anything specific before enrolling their children at SJC?
There's an alarm or a buzz or something going off here, which maybe I'm looking at the time. I'll keep talking, by the way, but could you repeat yourself on that?
Sorry, I'm getting some notifications, but we just wanted to ask if parents need to consider anything specific before enrolling their children at any college institution.
We actually talk about this a lot in the Alumni Association because we are very actively involved in the health of the college, expanding the student body. Because you always have to look to expand the student body. The student body today is very different from when I was here. When I was here, it was different from when my mother was here. So we're always looking at, okay, what's next? Where do we get more qualified students? From the parents' perspective, and we try to put ourselves in a parent's position where the son or daughter is in third or fourth year of high school. What should they be thinking about and why? How can we bring St. Joseph's to their attention? It comes down very often, well, economics. As I said, the economics was important for my selection. St. Joseph's has always offered a competitive tuition. So if money were no object, well, there's lots to do in life, but money is usually an object. So if you're asking frankly what a parent has to consider, the tuition at St. Joe's, as I said, has always been very competitive. It's not profit driven. They are trying to make it available to students who may not necessarily come from extremely affluent backgrounds. So that's a practical factor. Another factor is personality, and I've touched on personality a lot this afternoon. It's a very good fit for some students, maybe a lesser fit for other students. You'll have some students that go to a large university and they're going to be lost. My sister went to Fairfield, which was huge, and my sister's a very quiet type. She had gone on scholarship. The Walter Reed Medical Center gave her a scholarship, and the deal was she goes to anywhere she wanted. She went to Fairfield for 2 years, and she was supposed to go to Walter Reed for 4 years and come out with a nursing background. It was too much for her. It was way too large. So she went to Walter Reed. It was overwhelming. Came back to St. Joseph's. It was perfect. If you're the type of personality that flourishes in small, intimate, familial surroundings, St. Joseph's is a very good choice. If it's a student who's going to be very dissatisfied, unless there are 2,000 people around, and, lots of whatever goes on at all, away from home, 3,000 away. My daughter went to California, to California Polytech, 3,000 miles away, 6,000 students. I don't know if she's actually stayed in contact with more than a couple of people. And she loved the idea of being in coastal California in a science program. But I think she lost a lot by being there. If she had come to St. Joe's, I think she would have thrived. But she's somebody too that's very comfortable in a large setting. My son came here, he's not comfortable in a large setting. St. Joseph's was wonderful. And as I said before, he found his way into the chapel players. And all of a sudden, a quiet kid is up on stage being a ham. And, I'm looking at him, what happened? It was such a supportive environment. So I think the parent has to consider the personality of the child. And I guess for those students, back to Ahmad's question, students that are very direct early on to a particular career. There are some science careers maybe St. Joseph's does not have. There are some careers so you're going to go where that particular career is. But I think most college students aren't that focused that quickly. College is a time to explore. And as I said, some students from the first grade, they know what they want. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but for most students, you're supposed to be exploring in college, try out different things. And St. Joseph's may be a place where it's very comfortable for those students to try out different classes. For the student who is very focused on something we don't have, well, it wouldn't work for them. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Personality is a big factor. And to return to something that you all said at the beginning, and I will emphasize, the familial, intimate setting here, the close relationship with professors and administrators. Everybody is so interlinked on a very supportive basis. That will be great for a number of kids. And as you explore here, and you're sheltered from a lot, it gives you the opportunity to think things through in your own mind, so that when you leave here, you may be better prepared for where it is you're going, rather than still confused because you've been surrounded by thousands of students and you still don't know what you want. More questions?
Yeah, to finish up, I just wanted to ask about your oral history group. And since this is, for all of us, this is our first time experiencing a pandemic, how is the oral history group like taking it, and what specifically are they focusing on right now, would you say?
When I'm doing my oral history? I'm
yeah,
sorry.
like what's your main focus in the oral history group, like as a whole?
Oh, my interest in oral history as a whole? Generally
Yeah, like like obviously you're not alone in the group. So what are the other group members considering as we're going through a pandemic right now?
Are you talking about my historical society and the oral interviews we're doing there, or you talking about oral history in general?
Just like in general. In
general, sure. I'm at heart an academic. I love books. I love hard copy. I'm not, even though the computer is wonderful, I get more access through the internet that in my student days, I could only dream about, where to find something you got to write for and hope somebody responds. Or find the university that has the library, that has the file that you look at. It was tedious. Now you just get up there on the internet and 5 minutes later you have answers. That part of learning, that part of history, documents, reading, is of course, obviously incredibly important. But hearing the people speak, the back and forth, having a dialogue, you can tease out nuances in oral interviews that you're simply not going to get in a book. The book is giving you a script. It's already written. You can't talk back with the book. It is there. It's valuable. Oral history gives you a whole other dimension because you're talking with people. And that conversation may go off in directions you're not even counting on. And as I said, the nuances that come out can be enlightening. Now, you'll have some interviews, they go nowhere. Okay. You'll have other interviews. It's just going to open up windows into something you never considered. So oral history, I would argue, is very important. Now, this history group I started about 5 or 6 years ago. It's Breezy Point, New York. People have been down there for generations. Started as a summer community, now it's a year-round community, particularly after the recent hurricane 10 years ago, which basically destroyed the place. It's all rebuilt. It's largely a winter community now. But it dawned on me several years ago, the kids growing up, the old timers told the stories, oral history, oral stories. Nothing got written down though. It dawned on me, we're losing those people, just the attrition of age. We're losing those people. We're losing the origin stories to go back to the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s. So we needed something. So we started pulling together all the documentation we could find. And then we started interviewing people who were around back then, who could tell their stories. And we found it to be phenomenally enlightening, particularly if you don't have a wealth of documentation. We may have a lot of documentation in one respect, but not others. Excuse me. Just in talking to some of these people who are in their 70s, their 80s, their 90s, not only does it bring you back to a world that doesn't really exist anymore. So the local history is enshrouded within a much larger social history, New York City history, national history, world history. So there are those layers to it. You're getting a perspective on these people's lives that goes back to the 30s, the 40s, and the 50s, and how that intersects with the community. So we're learning a lot about the community, how it was built, who built it, what were the issues. You've got these landmarks around. How did they get there? Well, these older people know it's not written down anywhere though. But then you get insight, the social history part of it. You get insight into their lives. What was it like growing up? It was a summer community, a bungalow community in the 30s, the 40s, and the 50s. What was it like? They were from neighborhoods originally, a lot from Bay Ridge and Flatbush, mostly Bay Ridge and Flatbush. They would go to Breezy Point in the summertime. But the neighborhoods were Brooklyn. What was the connection between Brooklyn and this beach community? And basically, what were the lives like? So you're learning about the community through oral history, but you're learning about their social lives too. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you so much.
It can fill in the gaps you're not going to find in the books, and it can lead you in directions you're not counting on originally. That can be very fruitful.
Yes, thank you for answering that.
Sure. As you can tell, I like teaching. You want a 10-word answer? I'll give you a few hundred words. Another question.
I think everyone is done for today. And to sum up, we would definitely like to thank you for agreeing to interview with us today. And it was really fascinating to hear about your experience. And since you've led such a meaningful life with so much contribution to the college. And thank you so much for sharing this with us.
It was my pleasure. I'm glad I enjoyed it very much. And you can always follow up with whatever you want to. Best of luck in your college career and your future careers, wherever they may go. Some of you actually sound pretty focused already in those careers, but good luck with them. And maybe I'll see you around the college. Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Have a good